why do they target you?
Why anyone gets targeted is because I was weaker than them. It's the more you realize it, the older you get, the more you realize that it really could have happened to anyone.
Let's get to the lifeblood of a desert existence, water. New Mexico's history is in some ways a war for water, marked with battle after battle for water rights, tributaries in the long stream of history, as they say. So we'll take a long view for a moment. The Upper Colorado River Basin Compact governs much of our water. It was negotiated in 1948. Now, Laura, did those negotiations overestimate how much water would have been available in future decades? Everyone talks about this. And if they did or they didn't, should we be even following these crazy things anymore since it was so long ago? But anyway, the original question was, did they overshoot the estimates on water?
I think that the estimates were optimistic. And now, of course, we're in a totally different period of history and climatic history, so they're definitely off.
And then you add to the fact, it wasn't that long ago, 20 years ago, we all bought into the aquifer forever meme. We'd all have water forever. So in this new era of water, these compacts, what's your sense of it as you report on them? How is New Mexico faring in these compacts?
Well, New Mexico aggressively ensures that there's enough water for us to get to Texas on the Rio Grande Compact, which is a really big deal because it ties into how much water there is for the river for the endangered silvery minnow. So the compacts are really important on the Pecos, on the Colorado, and on the Rio Grande. They're hugely important, and they affect everything else that is happening, and they sort of exist in a vacuum, but all those other factors, including the amount of water that's in.
Sure, and Sidsel, in a growing city, who knows what's the right amount, because you have to forecast these things out.
Right, and actually Albuquerque is just about to embark. I'm sure you're going to start noticing these flyers in your bills on setting a new conservation goal, because we're pretty much on track to meeting the one that's been set for 2014, which is 150 gallons per person. Catherine Newhouse at the Water Authority, the conservation officer there, she has said that she thinks that 130 would be a potentially realistic goal.
Now put that in human terms. What does that mean for folks? 130 gallons a day. Like, how much is a little wash, a shower, all those kind of things?
Well, I've been told, and I haven't been confirmed this yet. I was just talking to somebody yesterday who said he thought that humans living in a house with plumbing could actually get by on 16 gallons a day, because so much of what the rest of that is either waste or inefficiencies or irrigation. That's the big one, obviously. I've heard of people getting by on 30 a day, but I'm not sure how often you're showering when you're doing that. So I'm not sure I want to try that.
Delicately put. I appreciated that. Ellen, this is a big deal, of course, because water, it's the foundation for everything here. In your view, are we doing a good job managing this? Okay, we can meet some goals, and that could be okay. Are we doing enough in your view?
In my view, I feel like this is, like the flip side of a crisis, a real opportunity. One of the things by being a desert state is that, we are required to innovate. We have no choice but to innovate. And if you look at some of the things that are coming out of Sandia Labs and coming out of Intel and others, is some really smart innovations around conservation, and they're looking, and you actually have, it was interesting, I was meeting yesterday with a group from Israel. If you go, some of the best technology around water conservation is coming out of Israel, and there's a real strong interest in trying to partner up and figure out how we can kind of work together. The other one that I think is interesting, because when it comes, is looking at, we've all heard of smart grids around electrical energy. Well, this is looking at water grids that are sort of smart projects, if you will, and real, not just active water management that we have in, say, kind of an analog age, but actually digital. And we're seeing there's actually some projects afoot that are going to be looking at New Mexico as a real model opportunity for it. And frankly, we have a great place to just, try out these different technologies and see what works.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. Wally, one of the things that really interests me about your business is the new technologies that have come from our labs, and many times, about how to manage water that has to be used to extract things, and what to do with that water. Now, we're not going to get the holy grail of having potable water, But we are now at a point where you can actually reuse many millions of gallons that have to be used for extraction in other purposes now. It's a very interesting phenomenon when you think about it.
Yeah, one of the main uses of water in the modern oil and gas industry is hydraulic fracturing. And the water that comes back from the fracturing process, there's a host of different technologies that are being used to treat that water and recycle it and get it back into shape so that it can be used in the fracturing process again. Because it is a major user of water, and anything that can be done in that regard is a very positive. The other thing is there's a lot of brackish water in New Mexico, and some of the technologies you maybe alluded to is there's various projects where people are looking at treating brackish water potentially to drinking water standards. So that could be a big thing just for the state in general.
The pit rule. How does the pit rule fit into that idea of water management for your organization? Because and a secondary question, how many millions of gallons are we talking about collectively that the industry uses here for extraction?
That's a great question, and honestly have not totaled that up. But on a typical well, if it's a vertical well, straight down well, the hydraulic fracturing process could be as few as 100,000 gallons. If it's a very deep well and then a very long horizontal well, which is the new technology that you have multiple stage of hydraulic fracturing. I did some research early in the week and found some that were upwards of 1.5 million gallons. So it's a big water user, there's no question. That's why the industry is so interested in doing everything we can to do that.
You guys have proposed your own ruling for this. What was the thought behind that, about the pit rule specifically?
Well, the pit rule is it's not exactly related to fracturing. It's more having to do with the structures like the low-grade tanks that capture produced water from an oil or gas well, as well as using these line pits that are used when a well's drilled. The drilling cuttings that come back have water and basically the rock and the drilling compound in them. Right now, the rules are such that you have to use what's called a closed loop system, where all of those drilling cuttings come back into a tank, and then they're dried, and then they're actually taken, hauled over the road, and disposed of in a facility. What we've proposed, and the hearing will happen in mid-May, is that in cases where the distance to groundwater is sufficient, we would just be able to use a line pit. And in some cases, if the chloride level, and chloride is it's a salt, if the chloride level of the drilling cuttings is low enough, we propose to be able to just bury those on site. In cases where the distance to groundwater is far enough and the amount of chloride is low enough. And we think that's not only the economical thing, but the environmental thing, because in a lot of cases with low chloride drilling cuttings, we're taking those and we're drying them on site. That takes a lot of energy. And then we're hauling them over the roads in trucks to a disposal facility when, in a lot of cases, if they're tested and found to be of proper quality, they can just be buried right on site. And that's the proposal in a nutshell of what the new pit rule proposal will be dealing with.
Interesting. Laura Pascas, you've been reporting on the pit rule for quite a bit now, too. As I hear it, some of the problem is you mentioned the temporary pits, where things are held. I believe that the ruling is now for a year or less. Is that how it works? For a temporary, basically, about a year or less.
Yes.
Yeah. Based on what we were just hearing, is that something the environmental community can get behind, changes like this where things are going back in the ground if they're showed to be safe and okay? What's your sense of that?
Well, I'd hesitate to speak for the environmental community, but I just was sort of baffled because when the pit rule was passed in 2008, it was the most stringent in the country. Other states were looking to it as a real example of how to ensure that groundwater and surface water and soils were being protected. And the industry opposed it. But I've always been sort of baffled because business was booming. There are more federal leases approved in the state than there are wells being drilled. I've never understood the real reason for the opposition to a rule that benefits the state industry hasn't been hurting, and so I've just been baffled.
Interesting point. We'll see how that all plays out, because I think that's part of that tension that's going to come out in the legislature when these things do get proposed, and others will be in the mix as well. I've got a fundamental question for you. This happens I hear this all the time. Is water priced at its appropriate value?
That's a great question. I mean, that's always the specter on the horizon in any water conversation. At the water dialogue this year, I sat next to a gentleman who sat there kind of muttering to himself, and it's all discussion about the compacts and the Interstate Stream Commission and all the wonderful things that are going on and the not so wonderful things that are going on, and he's just sitting there saying, if they just price water appropriately, none of this would be an issue. And I think that is, a legitimate thing. For example, Albuquerque charges surcharges on waste based on the percent of your. They look at your averages for the winter, and then if it's double or triple or quadruple that in the summer, you start getting charged extra. And actually, some rules that were just approved last night by on Wednesday by the Water Authority, those surcharges will double and triple now in the summer as a drought emergency increases. So that's one step in the direction of pricing in a way that encourages good behavior.
Right. Let me stop you there. That's a real good one right there. Does that work on a consumer level, that good behavior, incentive or disincentive? Does that work? I mean, can we get down to 130 gallons if water is priced higher over a certain amount of usage? Paying for consumption, basically, is what water advocates talk about all the time.
Right. Well, I think that people are amazingly resilient in being able to reduce their water use. Los Angeles, for example, when they were recently told, or a few years ago, I'm not sure exactly when it was, that they weren't going to get the amount of water they were used to getting, suddenly use plummeted, and they really did manage to conserve quite a bit. So I think people can, and probably pricing is one part of that. Albuquerque is actually going to be having positive incentives during if there should be a drought this year in terms of rebates, or take a class and you get some money back. That kind of reward system, I don't think it's been tried anywhere, so it'll be interesting to see whether that works.
I'm not sure if I'm right on this, but my understanding is the goal and